When the key refused to turn, I knew my life was over, at least the life I had before. It wasn't a broken lock, it was betrayal, cold, deliberate, final. The Charleston air was thick with humidity that afternoon, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the world feel heavy. My suitcase was still warm from the Florida Sunday. 2 weeks visiting my sister, that's all I'd been gone. 2 weeks. And now, standing on my own porch, I couldn't get inside the house I had built with 40 years of aching hands and sleepless nights. I jiggled the key again. Nothing, not even a click. Then footsteps, slow, confident, coming from inside. The door creaked open, and there she was, Lydia, my daughter-in-law. She looked different. Gone was the fake smile she used at family dinners, the soft tone that used to hide her contempt. What replaced it was sharp, polished, and poisonous. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "You're back early, mother-in-law." Her voice sliced through the air like a cold knife. "Why doesn't my key work?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. Lydia rested one hand on the doorframe, blocking my way in. "Because we changed it. Daniel and I made some updates. Things are different now. She gestured behind her. "This is our house." The words hit harder than any slap. I laughed, one of those disbelieving, broken laughs that sound more like a sob. "Your house? Lydia, this house is in my name. I bought it. I've paid every tax, every repair." She tilted her head, smirking. "Not anymore. We've taken care of everything. Paperwork, signatures. You really should have been more careful." "Paperwork?" My throat tightened. "What paperwork?" "Maybe you don't remember signing it," she said sweetly. "At your age, that happens." And there it was, the first blow. The one that tells you you're not a mother anymore, not family, just an obstacle to be moved. Behind her, I saw Daniel, my son, standing in the Tebelin town. "Daniel," I said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." He hesitated, shoulders tense, eyes glued to the floor. "Mom, maybe it's better if we talk later." Later. That word tasted like ashes. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, clarity, the kind of sharp calm you only feel when there's nothing left to lose. "Step aside," I told Lydia. She didn't move. "You can't stay here anymore, mother-in-law. It's time for you to understand that things have changed." I looked her straight in the eye. "You're right, Lydia. They have." I reached into my purse and pulled out the phone Daniel gave me last Christmas. "So you can stay connected, Mom." Funny how that phrase would come back to haunt him. I unlocked the screen and pressed record. Lydia frowned. "What are you doing?" "Oh, nothing," I said, my voice steady, "just making sure I don't forget this moment." Something flickered in her eyes, fear. Because when a 6-7-year-old woman smiles, after being thrown out of her own house, I added, "it's not because she's defeated, it's because she's already planning your downfall." For a second, silence. Then Lydia forced a laugh. "You're delusional." But my calm terrified her more than any scream could have. I turned to Daniel, whose lips trembled with guilt. "You used to hold my hand when you were scared," I whispered. "Now you're scared of me, aren't you?" He said nothing. I stepped back from the porch, the evening light wrapping the house in gold, the same gold that once felt like warmth but now burned like fire. "You'll regret this," I said softly. "Both of you." I walked down the driveway without looking back, the sound of my heels sharp against the concrete. Every step felt heavier, but inside me something ancient, something fierce, was waking up. When I reached the sidewalk, I stopped. The wind off the harbor brushed against my face, carrying the scent of salt and magnolia. I took one deep breath. If they thought they could take my home, they were wrong. If they thought age made me powerless, they were fools. They had started a war, and I had nothing left to lose. They say a house is made of bricks and wood. But this one, my house, was made of something else. Blistered hands, sleepless nights, and a kind of stubborn hope that refused to die. Long before Lydia's perfume and fake smiles filled those hallways, that house was just a dream I carried in a plastic lunchbox. Every morning, I'd drop Daniel off at the neighbor's before the sun rose, pack a peanut butter sandwich for lunch, and walk down King Street with my uniform folded under my arm. The air at 5 a.m. in Charleston had a particular smell back then, a mix of bread from the bakery, cigarette smoke, and rain-soaked pavement. That smell was survival. I was 17 when I started working. By 30, I was cleaning 3 different buildings, banks, doctor's offices, and a law firm downtown. People saw a janitor with bleach-stained clothes. What they didn't see was the math I did in my head every day. $1 for groceries, $2 for Daniel's school supplies, $5 into the savings jar hidden behind the flour bag. My husband had left when Daniel was 5. He took the car, the little savings we had, and left a note that said, "You'll figure it out, you always do." He was right, I did. But figuring it out meant giving up things that never came back: sleep, youth, laughter. Sometimes, when I came home after midnight, Daniel would be waiting on the couch, pretending to be asleep. His small hand would slip into mine. "Mom," he'd whisper, "one day I'll buy you a big house so you don't have to work anymore." And I'd smile, even though I knew he didn't understand. I wasn't working for a house from him, I was building one for him. Those years became a rhythm scrub: rinse, pray, repeat. By the time Daniel graduated high school, I had saved $95,000. Every dollar was a scar, every cent a piece of my spine. But it still wasn't enough for a down payment on a safe neighborhood. So, I kept going another decade of mops, floors, and polite "good morning, ma'am" from people who never remembered my name. When I finally held the keys in my hand, the same keys that now meant nothing, it was raining. I remember because the raindrops mixed with my tears as I stood in front of the house for the first time. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small porch facing the street. To anyone else, it was just another house in Charleston. To me, it was freedom. It was proof that the world hadn't beaten me yet. That day, I walked through every room, whispering to the walls. "This is yours, Daniel," I said aloud. "Your future, your safety, your inheritance." Funny how promises meant to protect can turn into weapons later. Years passed. Daniel went to college, got a job at the bank. I remember how proud I was when he introduced me to his first girlfriend, a bright-eyed intern named Lydia Parker. She had that kind of charm that feels rehearsed but polished, like she'd been practicing her whole life. She hugged me on our first meeting, said I reminded her of her late grandmother. I believed her. That's the thing about good liars, they don't just tell lies. They study you first, find the soft spots, and push gently until they know exactly where you break. For the first year, Lydia was the perfect daughter-in-law. She brought flowers on Sundays, asked for family recipes, even helped me repaint the kitchen. She'd laugh at Daniel's old childhood stories, the ones about how I once burned an entire batch of Christmas cookies but pretended it was smoky flavor. I thought I'd found another daughter. Then came the wedding. It was beautiful, small, filled with light. I spent $8,000 on it, my entire emergency fund. When I handed Lydia the deed to the house as a wedding gift, she cried and hugged me. "So you'll always have a home," I told her. "For your family." I didn't realize I just handed her the first piece of the weapon she'd use against me. After the wedding, they moved in. It made sense at first. Houses in Charleston are expensive, and they wanted to save for their own place. "Just for a while," Daniel said. "Temporary." Temporary. I should have paid attention to that word. It has a way of turning into forever when you're not looking. At first, everything seemed fine. We cooked together, shared mornings over coffee, laughed about neighbors. But slowly, like rust creeping under fresh paint, things began to change. The first time I noticed something wrong was small: a framed photo of Daniel as a child missing from the hallway. Then my favorite vase gone. Lydia said she accidentally broke it while cleaning. Later, the old armchair I loved disappeared, replaced with a sleek gray one she called minimalist. Every time I walked through my house, I saw less of me and more of her. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "Yes, we live with my mother-in-law, but it's just temporary. You know how it is, we'll have our own place soon." Her voice carried pride, like she was embarrassed by my presence. Temporary, again. I began to feel like a guest in the home I'd built. I tried to talk to Daniel. "Honey, maybe it's time you two get your own place. I don't want to feel like I'm in the way." He smiled, tired. "Mom, Lydia loves you. She just wants to make the house feel fresh. Give her time." Time I gave them. 3 years of it. Every inch of that house turned into theirs: the furniture, the colors, even the scent. Lydia hosted dinners, told guests. Daniel and I worked so hard to make this house a home. I'd stand there, holding a tray of drinks, invisible in my own living room. The final straw came the Christmas after Daniel's promotion. I came home to find Lydia boxing up the decorations I'd had since Daniel was a child, the same ones we hung together every December. "These are too old, mother-in-law," she said, not looking up. "We're buying new ones this year, something more modern." I reached for the box. "Those ornaments are 40 years old, Lydia. They're memories, not clutter." She pulled it away sharply. "Traditions can change too." Daniel said nothing. He just stood there, silent, as if neutrality could make him innocent. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by boxes of my own belongings, shoved into corners like unwanted trash. For the first time in my life, I felt truly small, like the walls were closing in, erasing me one picture frame at a time. But here's the thing about small spaces: they make you think clearer. I started to notice details I'd ignored: the way Lydia watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, the quiet conversations she had on the phone that stopped when I walked in, the bank letters addressed to Daniel but delivered to my mailbox. Something was happening, and I had no idea that the real betrayal hadn't even begun yet. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened an old photo album, the one Lydia hadn't gotten to yet. Pictures of Daniel at 5, smiling with a chocolate-smeared face. Me, holding him in front of the first apartment we rented after his father left. Each photo was a battle won, a life rebuilt. I whispered to the empty room, "I built this house for you, Daniel. Don't let her destroy it." I didn't know then that he already had. The message came just after midnight. "You shouldn't have called that investigator, Evelyn. Some secrets aren't yours to keep." I read it 3 times, each word slicing deeper. The number was unknown, the tone was venomously calm. Someone knew. Someone was watching. The glow from my phone lit up the room in ghostly blue. Outside, Charleston slept, but I couldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, every muscle tight, trying to breathe. Sergio had been careful, too careful. He used unmarked cars, encrypted files, no paper trails. Only Linda and I knew about him. So how did they find out? I texted back one word: "Who?" The reply came within seconds. "Someone who knows you better than you think." A chill raced up my spine. I threw the phone on the bed and grabbed my robe. From the window, I could see the faint silhouette of my house down the street, dimly lit under the street lamp. The windows glowed softly warm, peaceful, deceitful. I didn't go back to sleep that night. At dawn, I called Sergio. "Someone knows," I said, skipping the greeting. "They sent me a message." He exhaled sharply. "From what number?" "I don't recognize it." "Do not reply again," he warned. "And don't confront them. Let me handle this." "I'm not backing down, Sergio. I'm not asking you to. But the moment they sense fear, they'll accelerate. That's how people like Lydia operate. They tighten the net the second they think their prey's squirming." I clenched my jaw. "Then it's time to remind them I'm not prey." That morning, Lydia was waiting for me in the kitchen, already dressed, makeup flawless, her hair pulled into that perfect twist she wore like a crown. She was slicing oranges, humming softly. "Morning, mother-in-law," she said, not looking up. "Sleep well?" Her tone was sweet, but laced with mockery. She knew something. "I did, actually," I said. "Dreamed of justice." Her knife paused midair. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered, but she recovered instantly. "Justice?" "Yes," I said. "It's funny how dreams can be so prophetic." She set the knife down and turned to me. "You've been busy lately. Trips to the bank, calls in private, visits from that old friend of yours. I hope you're not tiring yourself out." There it was, the warning hidden beneath courtesy. "I'm fine," I replied evenly. "You seem more worried about me than usual." "I just care," she said softly, stepping closer. "We're family, Evelyn. I don't want you to make bad decisions." I met her gaze. "Neither do I." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then let's make sure we understand each other." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, cream-colored, thick, expensive. My cousin Javier finished preparing everything: the power of attorney, the property transfer, the joint investment documents. It's all here. She slid the folder across the table, her polished nails tapping the edge. "All you have to do is sign. Daniel's already reviewed it." I looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy surface. "I'll take a look later," I said, standing up. "Oh, no rush," she said, that smile widening. "But the sooner we handle it, the better for everyone. You trust Daniel, don't you?" I turned to her slowly. "I used to." The smile froze. Then, for the briefest moment, her mask cracked, and I saw it. The real Lydia. Cold, calculating, furious that I wasn't bending to her pace. But she recovered quickly, laughing it off. "You're funny, Evelyn, always so dramatic." "Drama," I said, walking past her, "usually begins with a bad script, and this one's full of holes." By noon, I met Sergio in a diner off Highway 17. He looked tense, his phone buzzing every few minutes. "They've started covering their tracks," he said. Javier deleted his online profiles, wiped his law firm's website. Lydia's been moving digital files through her work computer, probably trying to transfer or hide the forgeries. And Daniel? He's nervous, doesn't seem to know the full picture, but he's in deep. He signed at least one falsified document already, an early draft of the property transfer. My stomach twisted. "He's my son, Sergio. I can't let him go to prison for her." He leaned forward. "Then you'd better make sure he sees what she's capable of, before she burns him too." I sighed, gripping the edge of the table. "So what's next?" He smirked faintly. "We let her set the trap. Then we turn it inside out." 3 days later, Lydia made her move. She came into my room that morning, holding a cup of coffee cream, 2 sugars, just the way I liked it. "Thought you could use a little pick-me-up," she said with that smooth, confident tone. "Thank you," I said, accepting it. She watched closely as I took the first sip, too closely. My tongue tingled faintly, a strange metallic taste. I set the cup down. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No," I said, forcing a smile, "just hotter than usual." I pretended to drink another sip before setting it aside. When she left the room, her perfume lingered lavender, with a trace of poison underneath. I waited exactly 10 minutes before calling Sergio. "She tried something," I whispered. "In the coffee." He swore under his breath. "Don't touch it again, I'll get it tested." It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was proof. Proof that Lydia wasn't satisfied with legal theft, she was ready for chemical persuasion. When she came back an hour later, I was sitting by the window, calm as ever. "Feeling better?" she asked, her smile almost too wide. "Much," I said, "though I think I'll stick to tea from now on." Her eyes flicked to the untouched cup, and for the first time, she looked uneasy. That evening, I played my part better than ever. At dinner, I told Daniel that I was ready to finalize the paperwork. Lydia nearly dropped her fork. "That's wonderful news," she said quickly. "We'll have Javier come by tomorrow afternoon, less hassle than going downtown." "Perfect," I said, smiling. "Let's make it official." But what they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Mr. Hernandez, my own lawyer, and to the police department's financial crimes division. Tomorrow, when Lydia's lawyer arrived, he'd be met with more than just my signature. The next day was strangely quiet. Lydia cleaned obsessively, humming louder than usual. Daniel paced around, restless. The house felt like a stage right before the curtain rose. At 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled up in front of the house. A tall man in a gray suit stepped out. Javier. He looked exactly like the kind of man who'd ruin lives with a smile. "Mrs. Carter," he said, shaking my hand. "Such a pleasure." "The pleasure's all mine," I replied. "Please, come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Lydia had first called it our house. Papers were laid out neatly in front of me. Power of attorney, property transfer, signature lines waiting. "Everything's ready," Javier said smoothly. "Once we have your signature, we can process it within 48 hours. Lydia hovered beside him, beaming. Daniel sat silently across from me, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I picked up the pen. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. "Just sign here," Javier said, tapping the page. I smiled. "Before I do, I just have one question." "Of course. Do you prefer to confess on paper or on camera?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" At that moment, the front door opened, and 2 men in suits walked in, followed by Mr. Hernandez and Sergio. Lydia froze. "What is this?" "Justice," I said quietly. Mr. Hernandez placed a USB drive on the table. "We have audio recordings, video surveillance, and evidence of forged documents traced to your computer, Miss Parker, along with proof that you administered controlled substances to your mother-in-law." Javier's face drained of color. "You can't prove..." Sergio cut him off. We can. Everything you said in this house has been recorded. Every call, every forged signature. You walked right into it. Lydia looked at me, her composure cracking, her voice trembling with rage. You set me up. No, I said, you set yourself up. I just built the mirror. Daniel stood abruptly, his face pale. Lydia, is this true? She turned to him, desperate. Honey, they're lying. She's manipulating you. Daniel, I said softly, listen. I pressed play on my phone. Lydia's voice filled the kitchen, her own words from the night she plotted to have me declared incompetent. We'll have her sign everything. Once she's in the nursing home, we sell the house. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel sank into his chair, head in his hands. Oh my God. Lydia's voice broke. Daniel, please. But before she could finish, the officers stepped forward. Miss Parker, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted poisoning. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. As they led her out, she turned back to me, eyes blazing. This isn't over, old woman. You'll regret this. I met her glare with calm steel. Maybe, but not tonight. The message from Javier glared back at me like an open wound. You stopped Lydia, but not me. You think she worked alone? For a full minute, I couldn't move. My hand trembled around the phone, my breath shallow. The soft hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound in the room, slicing through the silence like a blade. Javier, her cousin, her lawyer. The man who had stood in my kitchen only hours ago, smiling, calm, confident. He'd watched Lydia being handcuffed, said nothing, and now he was threatening me. I should have been relieved that Lydia was gone, that justice had caught up, but instead, the pit in my stomach deepened. This wasn't over, it had only changed form. I texted Sergio immediately. He's contacted me, Javier. Says Lydia wasn't alone. He replied within seconds. Do not respond again, forward the message to me. I'll alert Hernandez. But as I stared at the phone, something in me resisted the idea of just handing it off. I had trusted others before, lawyers, police, even my own son, and each time it had left me with scars. No. This time, I needed to understand why. Why was this still happening? What did Javier want now that Lydia was behind bars? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, the Charleston rain tapping against the glass, watching the streetlights blur into gold ribbons across the wet pavement. I knew that somewhere out there, someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. By morning, I decided I would make it first. When Sergio arrived the next day, his usual composure was gone. Javier's not just a cousin, he said, spreading documents across my table. He's been under investigation before real estate fraud in Miami, power of attorney scams targeting elderly homeowners. Lydia was just one of several collaborators he used to gain access to assets. I leaned forward, heart pounding. You're telling me my family was part of a larger operation? Exactly, Sergio said. And here's the part that makes it worse, your son's name might still be on some of those documents. If Javier can frame him as a co-conspirator, he could shift the heat away from himself. My chest tightened. Daniel doesn't even know how deep this goes. That's what makes him dangerous, Sergio said flatly. He's naive enough to be useful. A bitter laugh escaped me. My son, the same boy who once cried over a broken toy, now a pawn in a criminal network. Life has a dark sense of irony. Sergio's eyes softened. Evelyn, this isn't just about the house anymore. It's about your name. They'll come for your reputation, your sanity, your credibility. Lydia may be in custody, but Javier's smart enough to keep her silence valuable. If she stays quiet, he walks free. So we make her talk, I said. Sergio frowned. That's not easy. She's got every reason to protect him. He probably promised her a deal or an escape. Then we find a reason for her to break it, I said coldly. That afternoon, I went to see Daniel at his office. The bank lobby was polished and quiet, but when he looked up from behind his desk, the exhaustion on his face was impossible to hide. Mom, he said softly, standing to greet me. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to find out my son's name is on forged property documents either, I said, folding my arms. He froze. What are you talking about? Javier used you. You signed papers without reading them, probably thinking it was something Lydia needed, but those signatures link you to a crime. He sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. God, Mom, I don't even remember what I signed. Lydia said they were insurance forms. She lied, I said. And now her cousin's threatening me. He looked up sharply. Threatening you? How? I showed him the message. He read it, color draining from his face. I swear to you, Mom, I didn't know. Lydia told me he was family, someone who could help us invest. I never thought. That's the problem, Daniel, I interrupted, voice trembling but steady. You never thought. You just trusted her, trusted them, and now you've dragged my name into their web. He looked at me with eyes that were equal parts shame and fear. What do we do? I stared out the window, watching people pass by unaware, detached, living their quiet, simple lives. We do what they never expected, I said. We fight back together. That evening, Sergio arranged a meeting with Hernandez at his office downtown. The air smelled of rain and old paper, and the blinds cast long stripes of light across the polished desk. We have leverage, Hernandez said, tapping the USB drive that held Lydia's recordings. But Javier's smart. He'll claim everything was Lydia's doing, and without her confession, the case against him is circumstantial. So we get her to talk, I said again. Hernandez exchanged a look with Sergio. You'd have to visit her in custody, he said carefully. That's risky. I've spent my whole life surviving risk, I replied. This time, I'm doing it on my terms. Sergio nodded slowly. Then we'll set it up. 2 days later, I walked through the gray hallways of Charleston County Jail. The air was thick with the smell of metal and disinfectant. A guard escorted me into a small interview room, bare except for a metal table and 2 chairs. Lydia sat on the other side of the glass, her hair unkempt, her face pale. Even without makeup, she was beautiful but in that fragile, venomous way that made beauty dangerous. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. Well, if it isn't the woman who ruined her own son's marriage. Marriage built on lies isn't ruined, I said calmly. It's corrected. She laughed softly. You think you've won. You think locking me up fixes anything. You don't understand, do you? Then explain it to me. Her eyes narrowed, studying me. You think I was the mastermind, but I wasn't. I was just one piece. You took me down, fine, but the man who runs everything, he's not someone you can fight. Javier, I said. She tilted her head. You think small. Javier's clever, yes, but he's not the one pulling the strings. He's just the messenger, the real one. He's closer than you think. Closer? Her smile widened. Ask yourself, Evelyn, how did Javier know about your inheritance before the lawyer even called? How did he know the exact amount? My breath caught. What are you saying? Maybe, she whispered, leaning closer to the glass. You've been betrayed twice. Before I could reply, the guard appeared at the door. Time's up. I stood there for a long moment, watching her as she was led away. She looked over her shoulder one last time, smiling with that same cruel calm she'd worn on my porch weeks ago. That smile haunted me all the way home. Back in my house again, I walked through the empty rooms. The echoes of the past still lingered. Lydia's laughter, Daniel's silence, the faint ghost of family dinners that once meant everything. I should have felt peace, but all I felt was a growing unease. If Lydia was telling the truth, if Javier wasn't the end of this, then who was? I poured a glass of water and sat down, trying to steady my thoughts. Sergio had texted me earlier he was digging deeper into Javier's financial records. But even as I stared at my phone, I couldn't shake Lydia's words. Closer than you think. That night, Daniel came by unexpectedly. He looked nervous, eyes darting to the window, his hand gripping his phone tightly. Mom, he said, sitting down. I've been thinking about what Lydia said before she was arrested. What about it? She mentioned something weird once about someone named Harris. She said he was the reason everything worked, that he was the one who handled the legal stuff behind the scenes. Harris? I frowned. What kind of legal stuff? She said he was a notary, someone who verified documents for her and Javier. She called him the man who makes paper real. The phrase chilled me. Sergio had mentioned a notary once, too, someone who helped Javier in past scams but disappeared before the investigations began. I grabbed my phone. What was his full name? Daniel hesitated. She called him Mr. Harris, I think. James or Jason. Why? Because the lawyer who handled Arthur's inheritance, the one who'd called me weeks ago, was named James Harris. My heart stopped. The same man who told me about Arthur's will, who knew the exact amount, who started this entire chain of events. I stood abruptly. Daniel, we need to go, now. He blinked. Go where? To Hernandez. If I'm right, the man who handled my inheritance isn't my brother's lawyer. He's the architect of all this. Rain hammered the windshield as Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale against the leather. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold and silver, bending through the storm. I could see the faint reflection of headlights following us in the rearview mirror, steady, unwavering, too close to be coincidence. Mom, Daniel said, voice tight, you're sure we're being followed? I didn't take my eyes off the mirror. Positive. Stay calm, don't speed, just drive normally. The black sedan behind us matched every turn. When we slowed at a red light, it stopped exactly one car length away. No movement, no impatience, just waiting. Watching. In that moment, the name James Harris echoed in my head like a warning bell. The same man who'd called about my brother's inheritance. The same man who'd set everything in motion. And now, he or someone working for him was on our tail. I pressed my hand against Daniel's arm. Turn left at the next intersection, then pull into the parking lot of the diner, the one Sergio likes. He nodded. When we turned, the sedan hesitated for a moment, then kept driving straight. I exhaled, my breath fogging the window. Inside the diner, the neon lights buzzed softly, flickering over the smell of coffee and rain-soaked asphalt. The waitress recognized me. Mrs. Carter, you're out late again? Couldn't sleep, I said with a faint smile. Daniel and I sat in the booth near the window. My hands were trembling, so I wrapped them around the coffee cup, trying to hide it. Mom, Daniel said quietly, who exactly is this Harris? I stared into the coffee, watching the reflection ripple. He's the man who called me about Arthur's death, said he was my brother's lawyer, but now it's clear he wasn't. He knew too much too soon. Daniel frowned. You think he forged the inheritance papers? I think he forged everything, I said. The call, the documents, maybe even Arthur's signature. If he's been working with Javier, that inheritance wasn't a coincidence, it was bait. Bait for what? To make me vulnerable. To make me trust Lydia and Daniel enough to move my money. He looked down, guilt shadowing his face. God, Mom, this whole time. I touched his hand gently. No more guilt, Daniel. It's time for action. Sergio arrived 10 minutes later, rain dripping from his coat. He looked grim. I traced the number that texted you earlier. It's registered under a shell company, one of Harris's front businesses. He's real, Evelyn, but he's not a lawyer anymore. His license was revoked 5 years ago for fraud and identity theft. Then who was he working for when he called me? I asked. Sergio's jaw tightened. He wasn't working for anyone. He's been running a private inheritance scam. He finds elderly people with estranged families, forges wills, calls pretending to be an executor, and then manipulates them into signing over property or financial control. Daniel's voice cracked. So my uncle's death, was that even real? Sergio hesitated. Arthur Hayes did die, yes. But there's no record of Harris representing him. He inserted himself into the process right after the death certificate was filed. My guess? He intercepted the notice before it reached the real executor. I felt dizzy. Everything I thought I knew about that phone call, about my brother's final gift, it was all fabricated. A trap, dressed as kindness. So, I said quietly, Harris gave me a fake inheritance to lure me into Lydia's hands. Exactly, Sergio said. He builds trust, then sends in collaborators to do the emotional work. Lydia and Javier were his foot soldiers. Why me? I asked. Because you were perfect, Sergio replied. Widowed, elderly, financially independent. No one expects a 70-year-old woman to fight back. He leaned forward. But you did. And that makes you a liability. By the time we left the diner, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy and dark. We drove to Sergio's office downtown, where Hernandez was waiting with new files. There's more, Hernandez said as we sat down. Harris isn't just after money, he's after property deeds. He's been funneling them into offshore companies and selling them under aliases. We believe your house was next on his list. Daniel's face went pale, but Lydia already tried that. Because she thought she was in charge, Hernandez interrupted. She was just the decoy. Harris let her think she was leading so she'd take the fall if anything went wrong. Now that she's in custody, he's cleaning up loose ends. Loose ends like me, I said softly. Hernandez nodded grimly. And possibly your son. Daniel swallowed hard. So what do we do? Sergio slid a small envelope across the table. We bait him back. You'll meet him, Evelyn. Make him think you're willing to finalize the inheritance transfer. He'll show up for the money he always does. I looked at him. You want me to face him? You've faced worse, Sergio said, and we'll be there. We just need him to incriminate himself. 2 nights later, I received the call. Mrs. Carter? The voice was smooth, polite, the same one I remembered from that first day. This is James Harris. I understand you've been having some legal confusion regarding your inheritance. My heart thudded. Mr. Harris, I said, keeping my tone even. Yes, things have been complicated. I'd like to finalize everything. That's wonderful news, he said warmly. If you have the documents, I can stop by your house tomorrow evening. We'll review them together. I want to make sure everything is in order for your peace of mind. Peace of mind. Those were the same words Lydia used before trying to poison me. Tomorrow evening works, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. Around 6? 6 is perfect. He hung up. I turned to Sergio, who was recording the entire conversation. He nodded once. That's our proof. Tomorrow we finish this. The next evening, the house was silent. Sergio and 2 officers were stationed in the back room with hidden cameras, Hernandez waiting nearby with a warrant. Daniel sat beside me at the kitchen table, his knee bouncing nervously. At exactly 6 o'clock, headlights flashed across the window. A sleek black car pulled up the driveway. The man who stepped out was not what I expected. He was tall, in his early 50s, dressed in an expensive navy suit. His silver hair was slicked back, and his smile was calm, practiced, almost charming. Mrs. Carter, he said, shaking my hand. So good to finally meet you in person. Harris, I said evenly. Please, come in. As he walked inside, I could feel the air change thicker, heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it, pulling out several neatly stacked documents. Now, these are the final papers for the inheritance transfer, he said smoothly. All legal, all verified. Once you sign, the funds will move into your account within 24 hours. I glanced at Daniel. He stared at Harris with thinly veiled anger. Funny, Daniel said. My mom's lawyer doesn't recall you being part of the process. Harris chuckled. Misunderstandings happen. I was your uncle's private consultant. Sometimes these details get lost in the bureaucracy. Like his signature? I asked. He froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. I leaned forward. The signature you forged, the will you created, the inheritance that doesn't exist. His eyes hardened. Careful, Mrs. Carter. Accusations like that can be dangerous. Not as dangerous as lying to the wrong woman, I said. Behind us, Sergio's voice crackled quietly over the earpiece. Keep him talking. We need the admission. I smiled. Tell me something, Mr. Harris. Why me? Why not some other widow? He relaxed again, leaning back slightly. Because you were easy, he said simply. Predictable, lonely. People like you want to believe someone's finally doing something good for them. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't show it. Is that what you told Lydia? I asked softly. He smirked. Lydia was useful, but sloppy. I never trusted her. That's why she's sitting in a cell while I'm still here. I felt Daniel tense beside me. You used her, he said quietly. Of course I did, Harris replied. That's what people are for. Everyone has a price, some in money, some in desperation. Sergio's voice in my ear was urgent now. That's it, we've got enough. But before I could signal, Harris noticed something, maybe the flicker of movement from the hallway, maybe Daniel's nervous glance. His smile vanished. You recorded this, didn't you? He reached for his briefcase, but I was faster. I slammed my hand on the table. You're done, Harris. At that moment, the back door burst open. Officers flooded the room. Harris, step away from the table. For a second, his expression didn't change. Then he laughed a low, terrifying laugh. You think this ends with me? He reached into his jacket. The officers drew their guns. Don't move. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small flash drive and threw it toward me. It clattered onto the floor. "Everything you think you know is in there," he said. "But be careful, Mrs. Carter. The truth doesn't set people like us free, it buries us." They cuffed him, but he kept smiling as they dragged him away. When the door closed, the house was silent again except for the soft hum of the rain returning outside. Daniel picked up the flash drive, staring at it like it was something radioactive. "Mom," he said quietly, "what do you think is on this?" I took it from his hand and held it tightly. "Proof," I whispered, "or something worse." The moment I realized Daniel was gone, my body reacted before my mind did. I ran to the window, my heart pounding like a drum inside my ribs. The headlights I'd seen seconds earlier were fading into the mist of the Charleston night, swallowed by the rain that had begun again. "Daniel!" I shouted into the emptiness. Only thunder answered. The house suddenly felt too large, too quiet, as though it had swallowed him whole. I rushed from room to room, his jacket still hanging by the door, his wallet on the counter, his phone charger plugged into the wall, but his phone was gone. He hadn't just stepped out, he'd left. The flash drive still sat on the table, the cursor blinking on the open document, where his name was written beside those chilling words. Executor, D. Carter. My son, my only son, the final link in Harris's web. But was he another victim, or the next conspirator? I called Sergio first. "He's gone," I said, my voice trembling. "What do you mean gone?" "I mean gone. He left while I was reading the files. His car's gone. He didn't take his wallet." There was a pause. "Don't panic," Sergio said quickly. "He might just need air. He's processing everything." "No," I said quietly. "This isn't that kind of leaving." I heard him grab his keys on the other end. "I'm on my way. Lock your doors. Don't open for anyone." When I hung up, I turned toward the laptop. The rain outside beat harder, as if it were trying to warn me not to look deeper. But I did anyway. There were more documents on the flash drive. Dozens of scanned IDs, forged power of attorney papers all tied to different names. Some were already crossed out, others were marked pending. Near the bottom of the list, one file was dated just 2 days ago. I opened it. My breath caught. It was a draft of a will, my will. Only this version wasn't written by me. It was signed by James Harris and notarized with a fake seal. And under the beneficiary section, it read clearly, "All assets, including property and inheritance, to be transferred to Daniel Carter upon the death of Evelyn Carter." A chill spread through me, like ice in my veins. Harris had planned everything down to my last breath, and Daniel, knowingly or not, was set to inherit it all. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Every instinct in me screamed to believe my son was innocent, but the fear was louder. What if Harris had already gotten to him? What if Daniel wasn't running away? What if he was meeting someone? Sergio arrived 20 minutes later, drenched, his expression grim. "We'll find him," he said. "I already called Hernandez. The police are tracking his phone." "He didn't take his wallet," I said, "but he took his phone. Why?" Sergio hesitated. "Because someone might have called him." I stared at him. "Harris? Maybe. Or someone worse." He glanced at the laptop. "You found more?" I pointed to the screen. "Read this." He leaned over, his eyes narrowing as he read the line naming Daniel as executor. "Damn it," he muttered. "That explains why Harris was so calm when we arrested him. He already had his replacement." The realization hit me like a hammer. Harris had groomed my son to take over. Not through crime, through inheritance, through blood. It wasn't just financial manipulation, it was psychological warfare. "Evelyn," Sergio said quietly, "he's trying to finish the job through Daniel. If he convinces your son to file that will, the transfer becomes legal. Harris doesn't need you dead, just declared incompetent again." The same trick Lydia tried. I sank into the chair. "So Daniel's not a suspect, he's the final move." Sergio nodded grimly. "And Harris planted the idea in his head before we even caught him." An hour later, Hernandez called. "We traced Daniel's phone signal. He's heading toward Mount Pleasant." "Mount Pleasant?" I asked. "Why would he go there?" "There's a storage facility registered under one of Harris's shell companies." "My guess?" "Harris told him to meet someone there." I didn't think. I grabbed my coat. "Evelyn," Sergio began, but I cut him off. "You can follow if you want, but I'm not sitting here while my son walks into a trap." Rain lashed the windshield as we drove east. The bridge lights flickered through the fog, reflecting off the black water below. Every second stretched into eternity. When we finally reached the storage facility, the place was deserted. Rows of metal doors stood like teeth in the dark, each one slick with rain. Sergio parked a few spaces away from a silver Honda Daniels car. "He's here," I whispered. We got out quietly, our footsteps muffled by the wet gravel. Sergio drew his flashlight and gestured for silence. The faint sound of voices drifted from one of the units. I crept closer, my heart pounding. Through the crack of the half-open door, I saw Daniel standing inside, drenched, shaking. Facing him was a man in a black raincoat. "Mr. Carter," the man said, "your mother made things complicated, but it doesn't have to end badly. Harris trusted you. He believed you were smart enough to do what's necessary." "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "Oh, I think you do," the man smiled faintly. "Your mother's signature is already prepared. All you have to do is file the documents. Once she's declared mentally unfit, the property becomes yours. You'll be rich beyond imagination." Daniel shook his head. "I'm not doing this. My mother—" "Your mother doesn't trust you," the man interrupted. "She never has. Look around you, Daniel. Everything she's done, the recordings, the lawyers, the lies, she's building a case against you. You think she really believes you're innocent?" Daniel's jaw clenched, his hands trembling. The man's voice lowered to a whisper. "You're already listed as her executor. That flash drive she found? It's just proof that she was planning to leave it all to you. You can still make it official before she changes her mind." I couldn't move. The words slid like poison into the air. Sergio leaned closer, whispering, "He's manipulating him. We need to move now." But I grabbed his arm. "Wait." Daniel's face was a storm pain, confusion, anger. I needed to see what he would do. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached for the pen lying on the table. My breath caught. The man smiled. "Good, you're making the right choice." Daniel stared at the papers, then at the man. His voice was quiet but firm. "You said Harris trusted me?" "Yes." "Then he didn't know me very well." He snapped the pen in half. The man froze. "What are you?" Before he could finish, Daniel swung the broken pen, jamming it into the man's arm. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. Sergio burst in. "Police, don't move." The man tried to reach into his coat, but Sergio pinned him down. I rushed to Daniel, my arms shaking as I pulled him close. He was crying not from fear, but from exhaustion. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know, honey," I whispered. "I know." The man turned out to be Harris's partner, a forger named Alan Price. He'd been running the estate scam for years, using different fronts in multiple states. Lydia and Javier were just pawns. Harris was the strategist. Price was the executor. But even after Price was arrested, one thing didn't sit right with me. When they searched his car, they found a single piece of paper folded inside the glove box. It was old, yellowed, and signed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Arthur Hayes. My brother. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than paper should. The handwriting, elegant, deliberate, was unmistakably Harris's. Even from jail, he'd found a way to reach me. "You've opened the wrong door, Evelyn. Arthur wasn't the only one who paid the price." I read it again, my pulse pounding in my throat. What did he mean? Was it a threat, a warning, or worse, a confession written in code? Sergio stood beside me, his flashlight sweeping the yard. The night was too still, the air too thick. Somewhere, a branch cracked. He turned instantly, gun drawn, but there was nothing, just the whisper of wind against the trees. He exhaled slowly. "He's bluffing," he said. "Trying to scare you, maybe," I whispered, folding the letter. "But if Harris is in custody, who left this here?" That question hung between us like the taste of storm air. The next morning, I drove to the county jail. I needed to see him. I needed to look into Harris's eyes and ask the question that had been gnawing at me since the night my brother's name resurfaced. The guards led me into a sterile visitation room. Harris sat on the other side of the glass, wearing the same calm expression he'd worn the night he was arrested. His hands were folded neatly on the table. When he saw me, he smiled, faint, knowing. "Mrs. Carter," he said through the phone, "you look well. Freedom suits you." I gripped the receiver tightly. "You had no right to use my brother's name." Ah, he said, leaning forward slightly. So you found that door. You killed him, didn't you? He chuckled softly. Such a blunt accusation. Arthur Hayes was a brilliant man, naive, but brilliant. He wanted to expose a network of financial corruption. Unfortunately, he trusted the wrong people. Like you? He tilted his head. He hired me first, you know. I was his consultant, legitimate, at the time. He found discrepancies in his company's trust fund and wanted me to trace them. But when he discovered that the money had been siphoned by people close to him, he hesitated. What do you mean close to him? Harris's smile deepened. You think this is about strangers and fraudsters, Mrs. Carter? No, it's about family. Arthur didn't die because of me. He died because someone else wanted his silence. My throat tightened. Who? He lowered his voice. Ask yourself who benefited most after his death. Who inherited the rest of his estate before you even received that phone call? I froze. There was no estate. The will left everything to me. Exactly, he said, and yet the account was empty when I found it. Someone got there first. He leaned closer, eyes sharp as glass. Do you really know your brother's past, Evelyn, or did you just believe what he told you? Before I could speak, the guard tapped the glass. Time's up. Harris stood, smiling one last time. The truth, he said, is always more expensive than the lie. Then he was gone. I walked out into the gray morning light, the wind carrying the smell of rain and salt water. Harris's words echoed in my mind like distant thunder, someone close to him. That night, I pulled out the box of letters Arthur had sent me over the years, birthday cards, quick notes, old photographs. Most were ordinary, but one envelope caught my eye. It was postmarked 3 months before his death. Inside was a single line. If anything happens to me, don't trust the one who calls you family. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting. Don't trust the one who calls you family. Who could he have meant? Daniel? No. He was just a child to Arthur, barely even knew him. Could it have been Lydia? Or... I looked toward the framed photograph on the mantel, a picture from my childhood. Arthur standing beside our older sister, Margaret. Margaret. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she moved to New York and built a life out of expensive clothes and distant phone calls. She'd always been ambitious, too ambitious. Arthur used to say she had the soul of a banker and the conscience of a thief. I dialed her number with shaking hands. It rang twice before a clipped, professional voice answered. Evelyn? I was wondering when you'd call. You knew, I said flatly. About Arthur, about Harris. A pause, then a sigh. Of course I did. Arthur told me everything. Then why didn't you tell me? Because you were too sentimental, she said coolly. Arthur trusted the wrong people. He always did. When he found out one of his business partners was laundering money through offshore accounts, he panicked. He came to me for help. You helped him? She hesitated. I tried, but by then, Harris had already gotten involved. Arthur was in over his head. When he disappeared, I assumed it was his own doing. Disappeared? I said sharply. He didn't disappear, Margaret. He died. Another pause. Yes, she said finally. And I think you already know that wasn't an accident. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you saying? I'm saying Harris wasn't acting alone and neither was Arthur. He was part of something bigger. He was moving money for people in power, the kind of people who don't like loose ends. And who are they? She exhaled slowly. You don't want to know, Evelyn. Let it go. Sell the house, leave Charleston, start over. I can't. Her voice hardened. Then you'll end up just like him. The line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of rain on the roof. Harris was in jail. Price was gone. Lydia and Javier were awaiting trial, but the real threat, the one that killed Arthur, was still out there. I pulled up the digital copies from the flash drive again, searching for anything I'd missed. Among the folders, there was one I hadn't opened before, labeled simply, MH Trust. I clicked it open. Inside were scanned bank documents, transfer records, and a name listed as primary trustee. My hands went cold. Margaret Hayes. The records showed millions transferred into an account under her name, funds originating from offshore companies tied to Harris's network. I whispered to myself, she knew, she's part of it. But before I could think further, the screen flickered once, twice, then went black. A small message appeared. Access revoked, file deleted. Then another line appeared below it. You were warned. I stared at the dark screen, my reflection staring back, older, tired but furious. I called Sergio immediately. The files are gone, I said. Someone wiped them remotely. That's impossible, he said. The drive wasn't online. It was just now. Someone hacked it. He cursed under his breath. Evelyn, listen to me. Whoever's behind this, they're watching everything. You're not safe there anymore. I'm not leaving, I said. Not until I finish what Arthur started. The next morning, I drove to an address I'd found on one of Arthur's old envelopes, a warehouse near the port. The place looked abandoned, but the padlock on the door was new. I forced it open and stepped inside. The smell of oil and dust filled the air. Stacks of old ledgers and filing cabinets lined the walls. Arthur's handwriting was everywhere, scrawled notes, red-circled names, arrows connecting companies I'd never heard of. At the center of the room was a single folder marked, Final Asset, Carter Residence. I opened it. Inside were photographs of my house, my yard, my car, dates, times, license plates. Someone had been watching me for months, even before Harris called. And tucked at the bottom of the file was a faded business card. Margaret Eyes, Associate. We protect what others can't. I felt my knees weaken. My own sister, the person I thought I'd lost to ambition, had orchestrated everything. Harris, Lydia, Javier, all of them were her tools. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Now you finally see the full picture. Come to the pier at sunset, alone. Attached was a photo, Margaret, standing by the railing, looking straight at the camera.